Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Ringer series here on clanofthegreywolf.com. A little bit of an extended absence, unforeseen extended absence there, but I am back, and I am ready to talk about all the great comments that you guys had in between then and now. So I apologize for the prolonged absence. Let me just give you a little bit of background on it. This has been by far the busiest I have been since I launched the Weekly Ringer, and I think it's something that's kind of abnormal in terms of setting and in terms of scheduling and everything else. So I apologize for missing, what would have normally been probably 2 episodes there, but have no fear. Those of you that might have had some conjecture that this was the end of the Weekly Ringer, I think you will be very disappointed, because it is most certainly not. I am committed to continuing with the Weekly Ringer, and as a matter of fact, guys, the irony of the fact is, in my life now, with some of the changes that are coming for me in my career, so on and so forth, I think I'll actually have more time to shoot the Weekly Ringer. So I'm thinking this is a really good thing. So we're not going away. Everything's good. Keep the comments coming, and by the way, we will continue to to ask questions with the greatest frequency that I possibly can, regardless of what that might be. Okay, so apologies aside for what we had for the extended absence here, but we got to get right into it. There's a lot to do today. In fact, one of the reasons why I actually stopped for a little while was because I had so many comments to go and look into, and I had so many pieces of knowledge I wanted to assemble into one place that it became something where I didn't want to shoot an hour-long video. I only wanted to talk about the greatest hits, and sometimes that is really hard to do, guys. There are a lot of great comments. I mean, most of the time, as soon as one person comments, I want to comment again. I want to jump in. I want to say something about that. So most of the time when you guys leave some kind of love within the comment section for a Weekly Ringer, I end up kind of talking through it myself. So I'll read it, and then I'll think about it, and then I'll talk through it a little bit. So if I did that for every single comment, and I did that for every single Weekly Ringer, every video would be well over an hour long, and I'm trying very hard to kind of keep things moving fairly quickly. That being said, boy, did I ask a doozy for last week, or 3 weeks ago now. If you will recall, my question was about the creation of what, this hasn't happened in reality, but if it were to happen, if they were to create a national video game registry, very similar to what we have with the National Film Registry, which would be the first game that you would select for induction? Now, before I dive into that topic, I also want to let you know that I'm going to welcome our new folks, as I always do, but then I've also got a question for next week, which I think is kind of a little more light. I think it'll be a little more jovial, and I think it could be something that we could see a whole lot of crazy opinions about. But in any case, it will definitely have you thinking about the recent history of some of your favorite TV programs, late night TV programs, I might add. In any case, so let me jump in with the new folks so that we can get this out of the way, welcoming some of the people that had some great comments this week or over the past couple weeks. I'm just going to say this week. You guys know what I mean by that. In any case, first of all, Red Mage, welcome to you. And by the way, what an explosive beginning to your contingent here with the Weekly Ringer, because I thought some really well thought out, some really great arguments were made, and I think I think there were about 3 comments from the Red Mage alone in terms of moving back and forth through some of the arguments that were going on through the comments. So I appreciate comments in general, but when we really have that kind of conversation, we continue it down the line. That only just adds to the enjoyment for me, and I think it adds to the enjoyment for everybody, which is why we had so many great comments this week. So welcome to the Red Mage. Welcome to Quintessence, which I think is one of the coolest names I've ever heard. I just like that. I like that name a lot. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. Quintessence. Welcome to you, Quintessence. Also, for this particular week, we had the Draco 4011. I'm guessing maybe 4011 or 4011. I don't know. But in any case, cool name and absolutely, an awesome icon as well. So welcome to you as well, the Draco 4011. I'm just going to go with 4011. That sounds good to me. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being a part of the Weekly Ringer. I hope to hear much more from you in the future through all of the many Weekly Ringers to come. All right. Now, we've got to get back into the topic at hand because this one is a doozy, folks. It's going to take a long time to unravel, and I want to have plenty of time to do it. So I asked you about this, the film registry question, but it is the video game registry, right? What is the first game you put into the video game registry? Now, before I jump into this, I think it's very important. One of the reasons I posted the criteria page, and I want to thank Mog specifically for throwing it out there and kind of breaking it down for us, is that the National Film Registry utilizes 3 criteria, which are films that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Now, there are, as we found out this week, there are endless different ways to think subjectively about that criteria. No question about it, right? And I think, as Red Mage said, we could probably stand to add another criteria, at least another criteria, to or another criterion to the criteria, which is probably gameplay. So in terms of cultural significance, historical significance, aesthetic significance, or gameplay significance, I think if you were going to make a video game registry, you probably would have to add an additional category, perhaps even an additional category that might get a little more granular in terms of control or in terms of experience, things like that. I think you could see something like that being added. And in any case, I thought that was good insight. And what's also good insight is Mog broke it down as being not and, but or. So the fact that it could be culturally or historically or aesthetically significant. And I think that's important. And I believe, as Mays pointed out very correctly, I think if we look for one that fulfills all the criteria, we are actually probably finding something that, doesn't necessarily do any of them very well. It might do some of them, it might do all of them to a certain degree, but it's not probably the games that we would consider for inclusion with the National Game Registry. Although I think there are some exceptions to this particular criteria, and I'll definitely talk about that as well. Some of them were the suggestions that you guys had, as a matter of fact. So in any case, let's jump right in. Let's talk about some of your nominations and why, and the ones that I thought were particularly moving from my standpoint for inclusion. First of all, Dragon Chi mentioned Myst, and I think Myst is worthy of consideration for this. Myst was wildly popular. Myst was historically significant. I'm going to use the criteria, guys. So I will talk about things in more general terms, but really I'm going to use the criteria because I think that's important. So in terms of cultural significance, Myst was huge. In terms of historical significance, I think it's difficult to deny that Myst sits as a new watershed moment for what video games can do in terms of an experience. I think aesthetically, this is what it does best. Aesthetically, it really is a kind of treasure when you're talking about video games in terms of an artistic environment. And I think in terms of gameplay, while I found it to be a little bit too hypercard, I think the aesthetics of it make up for the lack of gameplay. Although the puzzles in Myst are really incredible and engaging. If not, puzzles that'll have you kind of ripping your hair out. In any case, I think Myst fits a lot of that. I mean, it fits well, I guess, better into others, for example, aesthetically, rather than maybe even culturally. But when you have a game that gets created like Pissed, which is, obviously a parody game of a ridiculously popular game, it means that there is cultural relevance. And there is cultural relevance. I'm not saying that's the only criteria, but it shows a certain kind of cultural weight and cultural value to a game. So I think Myst, reaches that level of significance to the point where I think it should be worthy of consideration. Not sure it's number one, but I think it's worthy of the conversation for number one. Remember, every year a lot of films get grouped into consideration, and then it kind of gets weeded out until there are some left, and that's led to some very interesting inclusions into the National Film Registry. And I think the same would be true for the National Video Game Registry as well. So great consideration with MIST as well. Before I move on, too, I want to talk about something else. Many of you began a conversation, I think, and I think it began with the Onion Night, and then it kind of spiraled out of control from there with many of you, talking about video games as art and whether or not it was relevant to the discussion. Now, here, let me just talk about the three camps that I saw develop, right? Because I think it's helpful for us to kind of break it down in order to understand how we might be able to categorize games in this kind of an environment. So first of all, there is the Onion Night, games as art. Games themselves are not only artistic, but stand as an art and as a medium in and of itself. And I think there are great examples of this. And whether you think, it gets a little dicey because you have to include things like, Leisure Suit Larry and E.T. and a lot of games like Superman 64, for example, and say, okay, that's a work of art. And then you have several of you that say, well, it's not necessarily good art, it's just artistic. Okay, that makes sense. We tend to do have a little bit of a privileging of what it means to be art, so I can't argue with that. That's the first category, though. The second thing I thought was really cool is that games use art. So instead of it being, so when I say games are artistic, it doesn't mean that games necessarily are art in and of themselves, but that they utilize art in very experiential ways, right? So creating an experience by virtue of several artistic endeavors such as painting and shading and animation, with music and sound, to be able to create artistic experiences, so that games utilize art rather than are art themselves. And lastly, there were many of you that talked about it really doesn't matter, this isn't relevant to the conversation, because if we're talking about culturally, historically, aesthetically gameplay, then games above else are fun. And regardless, and they are an experience, right? So as a result, whether games are art or whether they're use art or whether they're just simple experiences, their inclusion in the National Video Game Registry should be probably more skewed toward the experiential rather than the artistic. And I think I tend to lean in that way, similarly to many of you. Now, whether games are or not art, I think is a separate argument we can have at another time, and hopefully we will, because I think it's a good one. We brought it up many times in the Clan of the Grey Wolf in our history. I know it's going to be something that comes up before too long, but before I open that can of worms, I'm going to step away and say I'm not sure that it really matters all that much, because of the fact that I think games are experiential. They're about fun, and if we look at the categories we've got, if we include the Red Mage category of gameplay, then I don't think it has to be judged in the same criteria as we would judge film or TV, right? So, little diversion there, but I thought it was worth mentioning as part of the ongoing conversation. One of the reasons why I thought it was such a good discussion. Logan of the North nominated Super Mario Brothers for the NES. Now, I absolutely think this is worthy of inclusion. I think it's probably got to be a finalist for the first class, if it is not the game itself. Now, why? Why Super Mario Brothers? First of all, obviously, it's one of the most popular video games of all time. It's seminal in terms of creating so many different genres, but also creating the kind of broad-based usership of video games, from being a fairly niche product to being something that really anyone can enjoy, whether you're a child, an adult, whether you have had the same experiences as people in Japan, or whether you've had none experience with Japanese culture at all. You can enjoy this game. It's not kind of culturally sensitive to one particular niche, so it's kind of the first mass cultural video game. And so there we go. Cultural significance. Need I say more? It's absolutely there. Historically significant. Hugely historically significant. So much so that it's, you know, obviously there was that famous